video is recorded for the digital library of the Outlook 2021, organized by Natixis CIB Research. To focus on the Brexit, I am pleased to welcome today Dirk Schumacher, who is the head of the European Macro Research at Natixis. Hello, Dirk.
Hello, everybody.
Actually, Brexit negotiations are still not closed, so I have to precise that we are recording this video the day before the event, and it means we are today, Monday, the 14th of December. So, well, today, where do we stand, please?
Well, I would have thought that by now we had some conclusion one way or the other. We would have found an agreement or not. But as it turned out, this weekend again, the deadline was postponed as both sides saw still the opportunity to reach an agreement, or that's a different interpretation, that neither wanted to get the blame for leaving the table. In any case, negotiations are still continuing, which unfortunately makes it again and still difficult to know what will happen afterwards. Overall, I would think it's a good sign that they really, both sides, want to negotiate till the very end, because it shows that everybody knows it's in an interest to find an agreement. Nobody choose to just walk away from the table and think everything will be fine. They're aware that this is a very important decision, and they therefore just keep on negotiating.
Yeah, and can you explain us why the negotiation is so complicated and what it took so long, even if you say it's a good sign?
Well, first of all, there are many difficult subjects, for example, the fishing rights, but also the so-called level playing field, meaning what kind of regulatory regime would the UK apply after Brexit has happened. And it also shows that both sides are very well aware of the fact that they need to work together going forward. If one of the two sides would have thought it's not important what happens, negotiations wouldn't have dragged on that long. The fact that they keep talking to each other means that everybody knows in principle it's important, because that's a neighbor we cannot ignore. Both sides will have to find some kind of modus operandi going forward. That's unfortunately the way it is, or fortunately, if you will. The UK is close to the EU. It's a big country. The EU is obviously close to the UK in a big economic area. So they will have to find a way to get along. And that's why it takes so long, because in the end, a lot of it is at stake. That's what this in the end shows.
And what will be the short-term implications of Brexit be?
Well, that depends to some extent, obviously, whether it's going to be a so-called hard Brexit without a trade agreement, or some agreement will be found. But even if an agreement is found, which I still think is a bit more likely at this stage, there will be some frictions in terms of the trade. So there will be border checks under most circumstances, which will slow down the trade, which currently obviously is very smooth because there are no border checks. So even if there are no tariffs, all the trade going or exports going into the UK or into the EU will have in principle to be checked. There will be some formalities. There will be lots of papers that will have to be filled out. That will slow down the trade. So the volume of trade will decline simply because of that. We don't know by how much, because we don't have any precedent of this kind of event, but that's the first thing that will happen, that trade will be lower. The good news in all that is, and I'm not trying to sound cynical, that the level of trade is very low because of the pandemic and because of the crisis. So the disruption that will be caused by these new formalities, by these border checks, probably won't be as dramatic as it would be otherwise. Now, if it's a hard Brexit, that will happen, then on top of that, there is probably some kind of sentiment impact, so that corporates will understand the shock, the medium-term shock coming out of that will be bigger, so there will be less investment. Maybe households in the UK will be a bit frightened as well about the prospect of a hard Brexit, and that will lead to maybe a bit more saving. Again, that's very hard to know, but in the short run, we should expect in any case some drop in trade activity, which obviously is not good for both sides, but it's in itself, if it's not a hard Brexit, not such a big threat to the overall outlook.
And what will be the long-term implications?
That depends. First of all, let's say there's a hard Brexit, no trade negotiation. My guess would be over some time, after a couple of years, there will be another attempt to find a trade agreement. And if that's found, then obviously we're back to a world where trade flows will be very smooth. And then there's, of course, the whole question about trade and services, the access London will have into the EU market. That all will be a part of another trade agreement or some negotiations about a further trade agreement if we don't have any trade deal coming now. But the crucial question that's, again, unfortunately hard to say is how attractive will the UK be as a place to invest? Or put differently, what is actually the cost of not being the EU in terms of companies investing in the UK? How many companies invested in the UK knowing from the UK they can export without any problems into a big market, the EU? There will be some frictions now. We don't know how big they are, but there will be some frictions. And all else equal, this will make the UK less attractive as a place to invest. We've seen since the referendum in 2016 that business investments into the UK are stagnating. They had been rising prior to that. Now they're stagnating. Why is that? Well, Brexit obviously has something to do with that. The uncertainty what the trade regime will going to look like, and so on and so forth. And it may be that on average, investment spending will simply grow more sluggish than it would have been otherwise. And that will then weigh down trend growth and so on and so forth. So for the UK, I find difficult to make the case that things will be better or a lot better. You would need to believe that there's going to be a lot of deregulation and it's going to help trend growth a lot, which I personally find hard to believe. So it's more a question how bad it's going to be not being part of, well, the world's biggest internal market, if you will. And that, in consequence, depends on what the new trade regime is going to look like. Even if we had a hard Brexit, there will be new negotiations at some point, and some modus operandi will be found. Again, both sides have in principle an interest to trade as they did in the past.
Okay. And tell us, so what happens to trade and services, and what are the implications for London as a financial center?
That, of course, is the elephant in the room, if you will. London was by far, and I think will remain, the biggest financial center in Europe. But it's also clear that access to the EU going forward, even if there's a trade agreement, will be limited. I think the Europeans will be reluctant, for various reasons, to grant the UK, London, full access to its markets. Part of it has to do that some of those jobs governments would like to see and come to the EU. And through regulations, that can be achieved. It will take time, and London will remain, I think, by far the biggest financial center. But over time, there's a bit of a self-reinforcing dynamics at play. If the different financial centers in the EU gain size, there are positive externalities, positive external effects to all that process, which will reinforce the growth in these centers. So there's a bit of a zero-sum game at play, and some of these jobs will go to the EU, and it's the regulatory framework through which the EU will ensure that London will lose in size, will be less dominant than it was in the past. That at least would be my best guess at this stage.
Okay. And should we expect the ties between both sides become closer again over time?
Yeah, I hope at least that there will be some arrangement down the road, even if we have a hard Brexit now, that both sides know there's so many areas where they should help each other out, if you want to put it that way. And of course, after a hard Brexit, if this kind of divorce, it takes time for the wounds to heal. There's a political dimension, obviously, to all that. But over time, and maybe eventually with a different government, what the EU means for the UK might be reassessed, the potential positive effects in a deeper cooperation. So eventually that will happen, but I would be very hesitant to put a timeline on that when it will happen. But again, I think in this kind of environment, global environment we're living in, with the US probably being more assertive when it comes to its own ways and its own its cooperation with other countries, even with the new administration. China obviously making pretty clear that it has certain ideas how the world should look like. Then, well, Europe in a lot of areas will just have to cooperate in a more closer way, be it in foreign policy, defense, security. And again, that will take time, but I think we'll see that over time coming.
Now, I've got one last question. What are the consequences of Brexit for the long-term stability of the European Union?
Yeah, that's the interesting part, because Brexit will not just tell us something about the UK and how it develops. It will tell us in Europe as well how important the EU is for us. Because we will see, leaving the EU, what does it mean? Let's assume the UK does spectacular, that the UK will grow over the next 10 years a lot faster than the rest of the EU. Of course, all of a sudden, leaving the EU might look a lot more attractive. I don't expect that to happen, and I would struggle coming up with good reasons why that would be. But if the UK does a lot better, some of the countries in the EU might say, we want that too, even if it's not related necessarily to Brexit itself. So it is a test as well for the political stability in the EU. The better the UK does, all else equal, that raises the risk that somebody in the EU will say, actually, maybe the price of leaving the EU or the cost of being the EU is too high. Again, I don't subscribe to that view, but time will tell us whether that's true or not.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Dirk, for sharing your analysis with us. I remind to everyone that your contact details at the end of this presentation, and also people will be able to find all the contact details of every Natixis speakers of the event on the dedicated page on the website of the event. Thank you again, Dirk.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.